buddy Max. He's in the camera back there. And today we're just doing a big old gun crash course for everybody. So we're going to talk all things guns, whether you know a lot about guns, whether you don't, whether you know nothing about guns. This is a great video to watch. Give a big overview of just what we know about guns, what we can teach you about guns, some safety stuff with guns, and we're also going to dispel some gun myths at the end. So just to start, we're going to kind of talk about a few of the things that we don't have, as well as some terms that you should know. Obviously, we're going to go terms first. So terms you should know, we're going to use some of them kind of interchangeably. The term action, so that just kind of describes the way the gun performs. So the way the gun is loaded and the way it then inevitably fires, and how you need to, what you need to perform between each shot of the firearm. And then platform is a very interchangeable term, but most of the time, like we'll talk about the AR-15 platform. So that's, everybody knows, or most people know the look of an AR-15, so that's that platform. And you can put different calibers in that. We'll go over calibers after. But then platform can also directly talk about the caliber or the bore size of shotguns, or the caliber of rifles, sorry. But so those two, I'll say them a few times most likely, but just know that they're pretty interchangeable terms. In terms of what we don't have on the table today, we don't have lever actions. We're going over all long guns today, so no pistols, even though I'll talk about those quickly at the start. But lever action is what you think of like the Old West firearm. So pull the trigger, drop the lever to reload. With those, there are modern types, even though they're considered the Old West outlaw type of firearm. They were the first repeating rifles made in America, or at least the first widely used. There were revolver rifles as well, but again, when you think of lever action, you should think of Old West. Shoot, use the trigger guard technically to reload each individual shot. So then in terms of pistols, there's semi-automatic, which we'll go over first when we get to our long guns here on the table. And then there's also revolvers, which have a cylinder. And again, Old West, even though there's modern types, it's what you think of a common sidearm in the Old West. So it's got the cylinder, usually 6-shot. There's some 7 and 8-shot. Load each shell individually, or each round individually, sorry. Click the cylinder in, pull the trigger, and they're what are considered double actions. So you think of the hammer on the back of a revolver. You can either pull it back and then the trigger becomes single action, so immediately after you pull the trigger, the bullet fires, or you can use a double action where you do not pull the hammer back and the start of the trigger pull begins to pull the hammer, and then the double action, the second action of the trigger, fires the hammer and fires off the round. So now we're going to get to some of what we have on the table. So here, our first firearm we're going to show is a 22 caliber. Choose a 22 long rifle. We'll get into calibers after. But it's your common semi-auto. So it has your port here, which you can easily open and then release to close. Also, just a quick reminder for all the firearms we have on the table. All chambers are either empty or open. So like here, Max, you can go down real quick. On our bolt action here and our pump, the chambers are both open, no rounds. Brake action is empty, I can guarantee that. This one also empty. No rounds will be put on them as we're indoors. Safeties are all gonna stay on, but that's just a quick safety overview of what we have there. But back to this. So semi-auto is what most people think of with a common firearm in today's day and age. Pull the trigger once, one bullet fires out, automatically reloads. So semi-auto, so the auto part of it, automatic, just means it automatically reloads itself. Semi means it only fires once. That's a common misconception. People hear automatic and they think it's firing off one after another. That's fully automatic. So the fully automatic, that would reload itself, but it's fully, so it continues firing so long as you have a finger on the trigger. With a semi-automatic, it's semi, so it fires once. So we pull the trigger once and it fires one bullet, and then it just automatically reloads itself, but we need to re-pull the trigger to fire another round. So again, this is a 22, very small round, about usually what's considered the smallest round, even though there's 17.17. Again, we'll get into caliber after. But this is just kind of your standard rifle in terms of semi-auto. A port, some sort of device to pull the port back. You can load the round in there. This one specifically is tube fed. Like when we were talking about lever actions, those are also tube fed, and most shotguns are tube fed. So we can open it up to see the tube under the barrel here, and we can load our rounds through there. Can you see it? And then, so the rounds load there, then we push the tube down, close it, and then the tube extends down into the rifle. So then every time we fire, we get a new round within it. And then there's also, we don't have any magazine-fed guns here, but typically that's what you think of with a semi-auto. So you take the magazine, put it into the firearm, and then you are loaded from there, but this one specifically is tube fed. So then our next type of firearm is typically in older guns or double barrel guns, such as this one. This one's actually a little special. It kind of hits both parts of the break action. Most time when you think of break action, it's single barrel. For rifles, this one is a rifle. It shoots a .223 on our top barrel, but then our bottom barrel shoots a 12 gauge shotgun round. So when we don't have a double barrel shotgun here, I have a couple at my house. But if you do shoot a double barrel shotgun, it's usually side by side, or this is what we call over under. So you can see the two barrels are stacked on top of one another. That's what you call over under. Side by side as if they are, of course, next to one another side by side. But this one is special because it has both rifle and shotgun. Usually with a break action rifle, it's a single shot rifle with only the rifle barrel. With double barrel shotguns or break action shotguns, they can either shoot 2 rounds if it's double barrel, or single action, break action if it only has 1 barrel. And again, there's rifles and shotguns that have both. Usually you'll find this in older models. There are some newer models such as this one that have a break action. Typically they recoil quite a bit more because there's not as much room for the gas to escape. We'll talk about that next with our pump, but a much less common type of action, but another good one to know about. So then here's a pump action. This is a 12 gauge shotgun. This is what a lot of people think of when they think of a shotgun, especially. There's, again, older styles of rifles that are pump action, very uncommon though. So here, our chamber's open. So the action of this firearm, pump action. So every time you need to reload a new shell, pump it forward. So now if there were a shell in there, we'd be locked and ready to go. So, but then if we pull the trigger, this one has, you can see it here, is a pump release. So if it's locked now because it's technically shell in the chamber if we did load it. So we hit the release and open it back up. So if we were firing this weapon and we fired, and then it would unlock itself because the round has been fired, then we could open it back up, it would eject that shell, and then when we pump forward, the next one in the tube would come in. So that's pump action. So each round you need to pump to reload the next shell. Again, very common for shotguns. I personally love this gun. If anybody's seen hunting pictures on my Instagram, I use this gun for a lot of different things. Coyote, turkey, smaller birds. But again, this is one of the actions that a lot of people think of with shotguns. But then also, although this one's a rifle, there are shotguns, again, that are tube fed. Like this one, the tube is underneath the pump. But if you did have a shotgun, if this were a shotgun that was tube fed and semi-automatic, there are a lot of shotguns, especially modern ones, that have a semi-auto action. So now here's the one that a lot of people kind of get a little weirded out by because it doesn't look, it looks overly mechanical. This is a bolt action. So this is a .270 rifle, a much larger round than the .223 and the .22 that we looked at earlier. But this is a bolt action, and these are usually used for more accurate shooting. So the action on this is bolt, as I said. So every time we fire a round, so that closes the bolt, and that would, if there were a round, that would lock the round in to be ready to fire. Pull the trigger, fire that round, open it back up, that ejects, close it again, that would put another round in. So the reason this is used for more accurate shooting in general, of course there's exceptions, every gun's different, but a bolt action specifically, it has a locking mechanism, it's kind of hard to see in here. If you can get closer, there's a locking mechanism right here, which I will pick up a round and show you. These rounds have a little lip on them, on the case. So when you load that round in, that locking mechanism grabs that lip of the case to be fired. So with something like a semi-auto, like this 2.2 here, there's a little more, not necessarily wiggle room, but that round is going to load a tiny bit differently every time, which means it's not going to be precisely as accurate as that gun can be if it were in a bolt action setup. So the bolt action, by grabbing that case, it loads it perfectly every time. And also when the bullet is fired out of the case doesn't move, it doesn't ripple, it doesn't have any true change to it that would change the trajectory of the bullet coming out. So that keeps the bullet quite straight compared to a semi-auto. Nowadays, there's a lot of modern semi-autos that are very accurate because they've cut down on that movement. But if you're going to shoot accurately, most people would say go directly to a bolt action. But yeah, those are kind of your basic rundown of actions. In terms of rifles and shotguns, again, we don't have all of them here. There are some exceptions. Muzzle loaders are another one, so you think of old muskets. Again, just about any old action, there's usually a newer model. So muzzle loader, you think of old muskets where you put the ball in, powder, push it down, and then fire. There are modern muzzle loaders that can be loaded a lot quicker, used for hunting primarily, not home defense. A lot of home defense stuff, I'll go over that quickly. We are hunters, and this is an outdoors channel, but we will look at home defense. Most of the time what you're going to see is you're going to see semi-auto, regardless of if it's a shotgun or a rifle, or pump if it is a shotgun. But yeah, these are a lot of your basic actions here. So semi-auto, break action, pump action, and bolt action. We also talked about revolvers in terms of pistols. What was I going to say? Oh, lever actions, that's them. And then muzzle loaders. So again, there's variants in all of them and what they can hold and withstand. But these are just some of your basic ones that we have available and we're showing you today. So next we're actually going to get to ammo, which is over here. And that's going to be a little bit tougher of a thing for some people to understand. So we're definitely going to go in depth with that. So we'll move over on to that. Alrighty, so now we're going to go over your common rounds. Again, we have long guns here, so we're going to talk shotguns, rifles. First, we're going to go over shotguns. As you can see, there's quite a big variance in shells. So we're going to start with the small one here. This is a 410, which is the smallest common shell. This is a 20 gauge, and this is a 12 gauge. So when we compare the three, obviously this one's smaller in size. So the way a shotgun shell, a shotgun size, in essence, is measured in bore. So when we looked at the 12 gauge before, which shoots this biggest one, which is the largest around, that's how the bore is measured, is the size of the barrel. Essentially, that's an easy way to put it. Obviously, there's a much longer thing, but we're doing a crash course here. We're not digging into direct measurements. So then the 20 gauge here, which is a medium-sized shell, as you can see, it's not as big around. So that port, that spot where the bullet or the shell goes into, in that shotgun, a 20 gauge shotgun, it's going to be smaller. So it's going to have a smaller bore, therefore a smaller shell. So then the 410, which is the smallest, obviously, is going to have the smallest port, the smallest bore for that shell to go into. So then when we talk about what's actually shot out of these, that can vary to a great amount. So this specific 12 gauge has a slug. I don't know how well you can see it in there. See it?
Yep.
All right. So that's a slug. So that's a single big projectile. So it's similar if we were to shoot a rifle round. Obviously, it's a lot bigger, but it performs similarly in terms of its projectile. So it's a single projectile. Whereas this, actually both of these, the 20 and the 410, are both pellets. So the 20 specifically, this is number 2 steel. So number 2 is about 3 millimeters. So that shot pellet is about yay big, which is a decent sized pellet. These are number 6, so that's a very small. That's like a bird and rabbit round, very tiny. I believe it's under a millimeter for number 6, maybe a millimeter. So the way shot, so that's what we call it, either bird shot or buckshot. These both fall under bird shot. Buckshot is the next step up because it was used to hunt deer. Buckshot, bird shot, used to hunt small game. So bird shot is measured. There's number 8 shot, number 9 shot, which is really tiny. But your common ones are going to be 7.5 to 2. So the higher the number in size shot, the smaller it is. So 7.5 or those 8s and 9s as you get really tiny are going to be your smallest shot. So used for birds, rabbits, squirrels, stuff like that. And then your bigger shot, so your number 2, like the steel shot here, is going to be your bigger birds. So your Canadian geese, your swans, stuff like that. Or even if you get the right type of shot, like the right metals, you can shoot bigger things like coyotes, hogs with bird shot. Then when we get into buckshot, it's the same thing. Bigger number, smaller shot. So it goes from number 4 to typically people shoot double R or triple aught. So 000 is how you'll see it, but we call it double aught, triple aught. So number 4 is the smallest. Typically used for predators, so bobcats, coyotes, stuff like that. Home defense is a big buckshot thing. People used to use it a lot more to hunt deer. Not as common, though it's legal in a lot of places. Others it's not. Like here in Connecticut, we can't shoot buckshot on state land, and we also can't use it to hunt deer. But the biggest market for buckshot is home defense. So, I mean, a number 4 pellet, it's kind of hard to show you with my fingers, but it's a decent-sized pellet. So you think home defense, it's going to hit someone pretty hard. But a lot of people step up even to number 1, number 0, or double aught buckshot, which is a very big pellet. And this one's only a 2 3/4 long case, but a lot of them are 3.5 inch, and they'll shoot only 4, 5, 6 pellets of that size shot. So it's not a single projectile, but it's only shooting a small number of pellets with those bigger pellets. So I think that's a pretty good rundown of that. That's pretty simple. Again, the only thing, if you are going to buy a shotgun, to be careful of, make sure you're buying the right gauge shells, and then just study up on shot sizes and slugs. There's lots of charts online that are very easy to pick out what you want. Plenty of videos to learn about it. So that's just kind of a quick rundown of shotgun. So now we're going to get into rifle, which, again, if you learn about it quite a bit, it gets pretty easy. I don't need 2 of those. So all of the guns here, except for one of these rounds, can fire one of these, except the shotgun, of course. So that first gun we looked at, the 22, shoots this little 22 long rifle. And that's typically considered the smallest round that is commonly used. Like I said before, there's a .17. This is the same 22, so the same bullet, but it's 22 Magnum, so it's got a larger shell or larger case, which means it's going to be it has more powder underneath that same size bullet. This is a 223, what shoots out of that break action, much larger case. It's only a 223. We'll talk about caliber in a second. So that bullet's only a little bit wider, but it is longer and more aerodynamic. It's often used for long-range shooting. And then that big bolt action we saw before, that's that 270, that much larger round. So what do people mean when they say caliber? So similar to the shotgun rounds, caliber is measured partially in the bore of the gun, but also in the size of the bullet around. So this 2.2 is measured in, it's a very complicated measurement, so again, I'm not going to go over the exact measurements, but it's measured in thousandths of an inch. So when we take that big number sequence and put it all together, we come out with .22, so it's measured in thousandths of an inch. So this tiny little guy here is 2.2, and then so is this one. So we're shooting the same bullet, just with a different amount of powder. So this 22 Magnum is going to shoot a hell of a lot faster than that 22 long rifle. In fact, these are actually subsonic, so they shoot under the speed of sound. But And then another big difference between the two is something we call grains. So grains, a lot of people, they hear grains and they think grains of powder. It's not grains of powder. Grains is actually a weight measurement. So it's weighing the weight of this bullet, the actual bullet piece. So if we took away the case and we're loading up just that bullet and we weighed that, it would be a certain number of grains. So that can change from each different round. So a Remington might be loaded with I'm not going to mention a specific one, but a 28 grain bullet. And then they might also carry a 30 grain, a 33 grain. So that just means a heavier bullet, but within that same casing. Because if I have different weights of bullets, I can't have different casings because then it won't fit in my gun. And then you need a gun for each grain of bullet. So it's the same amount of powder in that casing, but just a different weight of bullet. So then that affects how that bullet flies. So if I shoot like a typical 223 is usually in the range of 50 grains. So if I shoot that bullet, it's going to shoot nice and flat. But if I go up in grains, a heavier bullet, you have the same amount of powder. So it's not going to be pushed as fast because it's heavier. And it's not going to shoot as flat because it's heavier. And obviously gravity affects something heavier quicker. So it's not going to be traveling as fast. It's going to drop faster, which means it's not going to shoot as flat. But because it's heavier, it means it has more punch power. So if you hit something downrange, it's going to hit a lot harder than that 50 grain if it's up at the 65 grain. So like the 270 here has a very wide range of grains. So this one here is a bigger one, a 150. That's usually used for deer hunting. It's going to hit very hard, but it's not going to move as fast. Then there's ones that go down to the 130, the 110. I think the smallest I've ever seen is 90 grains. So that's a very, very light bullet with all this same powder underneath it as this 150 grain. So if you shoot that 90 grain bullet, it's going to come out super fast, but it's not going to hit close to as hard as this 150 no matter how fast it's going. So then when we compare the sizes, we're going to bust our first myth here. So people hear about AR-15s and how dangerous they are. This is what an AR-15 shoots right there, that 223. Again, it's not a very big bullet. It's about the size of my pointer fingernail. It's not a big bullet. But it does shoot very fast, very flat because of all that powder underneath it. But that would also be affected by the grain of the bullet. So if you're shooting a light grain 223, it's not going to hit that hard. Whereas a very common hunting round, a 270 or a 30-06, which is in the similar size, it's going to hit a lot harder than a 223. But people never think of this because it doesn't look scary. But it is a very interesting thing to see when you're stacking up what people deem scary versus a hunting round. So that's a very big myth that needs to be dispelled, that just because something looks scary doesn't mean of course it's dangerous. It's a firearm. It's a bullet. It's coming fast. It's going to penetrate. But in terms of hitting power, stopping power, what it can do to you, simply looking scary doesn't mean something is scary. So that's our first myth. We'll go over a few more of those after. We're going to put all this away and just sit down and talk. But that's just the first thing to look at. I didn't even mention how caliber stacks up. So the shells here, so the bigger shots, so the 7.5, or the bigger number shots, so 7.5 is going to be a smaller shot, whereas your bigger numbers, so number 2 is going to be, or your smaller numbers, is going to be bigger shot. These are rifle rounds are the opposite. So the 2.2, it's smaller, 0.22 thousandths of an inch when we go through that measurement. It's going to be a lot smaller, whereas the 270, 0.270 is, of course, a larger measurement, which means a larger round. So if you're looking between rifles and shotguns, you don't want to get confused with that. So with shotgun shot, the larger the number, the smaller the shot. With rifle rounds, the bigger the measurement. So 0.22 versus 0.27, the 0.27 is larger. So they are technically opposite of one another in the actual bullet size or pellet size. So now we're just going to go into some myths about guns that are very important to learn about, and we'll put all this stuff away and sit and talk with you. All right, so now we got cameraman. Second, yeah, you're just cameraman now.
Yeah, that's all.
Our second man, Max. Now he's in front of the camera with us.
But now we're just going to go over a few quick myths that are very commonly heard by people who don't understand too much about guns. And I think they're very important to go over, just so if you don't understand much about guns, to just put them out of the way. And I think the first one we started touching on it is basically looks don't equal power. So while a build of a gun can tell more about its capability, it doesn't necessarily mean power. The power is in that bullet, that round that's put in that gun. So we showed before that .223 is a lot smaller, a lot weaker than that .270. But it does. If you put that .223 in an AR, it has a different capability. So an AR is semi-automatic, so one pull, one bullet, and it's not like the bolt action where you fire and have to reload each round with that full movement. So the capability is in the firearm, so what it can do based off the different actions we showed you, but the actual power, the hitting force, that bullet does is not always, or what it does when it hits a target is not based on the gun. All the gun can do is just put that bullet where it needs to go. What the bullet does when it gets there is based on the bullet alone. So a scary looking gun like an AR, or what some people deem scary, isn't actually going to hit you as hard as a much larger firearm. So that's definitely a big myth that a lot of people think, where just because something's bolt action, just because it's a lever action, pump action, just because it's not shooting boom, 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 boom like a semi-auto, it's not any less dangerous. But then just because something does have semi-auto capability doesn't mean it is as dangerous unless it has that larger bullet. I don't think there's much else you need to add on that. No? All right. Next one, guns are an unsafe tool. If this was the early 1900s, the 1800s, yes, because those were early guns, not safe. Most of them didn't have safeties. Nowadays, modern guns, well-built guns, very safe. That's why I said very early in the video with safety stuff, safeties are on, chambers are empty. If I were to take one of those guns, lay it on the table right in front of us now, with one of its rounds right next to it, nothing would happen. If I put it in the chamber but didn't load it, nothing would happen. If I load it into the chamber, nothing would happen, as long as that safety's on. If I dropped it with the safety on, nothing's going to happen. People drop hunting guns all the time with the safety on, nothing happens. If I turn the safety off, then drop it, most likely not going to go off unless you hit it perfectly. Maybe, that's why the safety's there. But this idea that guns are a unsafe thing, this is why hunting is actually one of the most safe outdoor activities you can do, is because the tool in it is safe. It's not like a skiing pole where if you fall and you jab yourself with it, there's no safety on that. If you're hiking and you fall down a cliff, there's no safety on that. Obviously, you can do that in hunting, but there's other. Even fishing. Think about it. Hooks. There's no safety implement on that. They're sharp. They stick you. It sucks. But in terms of hunting and firearms, home defense and firearms in general, range shooting, it's as safe as it is. All the safety is put on the handler. So whoever is utilizing the firearm, if they are safe, that gun will be safe with them. So as long as that safety's on, you're pointed down range, there is no harm you can do to another person, so long as you're doing everything correct with the gun. But that also includes ammo, putting the right ammo in, stuff like that. But in terms of like the safety and it being a dangerous tool, because that's what it is, it's a tool. It's only what you do with it. It's like a hammer. If you lay it on the table, it's not going to jump up and do its job. It is a tool. So it is as safe or as dangerous as the person handling it makes it. And that is a big thing that a lot of people don't realize. Like I said, if I have a safety on a gun, if the safety is engaged, it's on, that trigger will not move. You can sit there and yank on it with wire and smack the gun, drop the gun. Unless it's a crappily made safety, it will not go off. And then one other final myth is the idea that legal gun owners are a problem. So this is a lot of things we see with gun control, where people say we need to take guns or make them less accessible, when your legal gun owners are not the problem. I don't like to get political on this page because it is an outdoors thing, but it is a true thing. the majority of firearms that kill people illegally are illegally grabbed. Because if you're a bad person and you're trying to do harm to somebody, why are you going to go through all the needy steps? Because like here in Connecticut, it takes 8 weeks to get a long gun permit if you even can apply for it. So if you get that background check, that's another myth I'll go over with background checks.
Yeah.
If you go through that background check, it still takes 6 to 8 weeks to even get a long gun permit to buy one of those. Why would somebody go through that when you can easily black market it if you're trying to do harm? And then another thing is going back to ARs and scary long guns. Those were all long guns. All of those put together kill people 19 times less than a handgun. And a lot of people also say that those are the choice of mass shooters. The majority of mass shootings still happen with handguns. So we have
the magazine in a handgun, and
yes,
you can also click that trigger a lot faster.
Mm-hmm.
And guns won't shoot by themselves unless you turn that safety off and pull that trigger.
Exactly. So a handgun is a lot more accessible. It's a lot easier to find, a lot easier to hide, a lot easier for a lot of people to utilize because it's a much smaller package. Whereas most of those have different uses anyways.
Yeah.
But again, legal gun owners, not a problem. Long guns as a majority, not a big problem compared to what people portray them as. And then also, what was I going to say? I don't know what I was going to say, Max.
Me neither, my bad.
But yeah, long guns, not a massive problem in terms of taking people out. And then I know what I was going to say. The majority of legal gun owners only utilize, again, going against that other statistic where it's legal gun owners can cause a problem. It doesn't really happen statistically. The majority are either pre-criminal or they are not a legal gun owner if they're going to use a gun in an improper way. And a lot of incidents are stopped by legal gun owners. Yeah. Concealed carry, someone with a home defense firearm. So if I'm out, I don't have a concealed carry. You can't have it till you're 21, at least in Connecticut. I believe it's 21 across the country. Don't quote me on it. I don't live across the whole country. But if you are concealed carrying, there's background checks. There's courses you need to take. Especially for concealed carry. Open carry is different. We don't have open carry here. Some places you can open carry with no requirements, or at least minimal requirements compared to concealed carry. But a lot of situations are stopped by defensive use of firearms, even if the gun is not even fired. I believe it's 3 million total, or some huge number like that of stopped incidences by legal gun owners. So, and then the final one, now I remember what I wanted to go at, was background checks. That is a huge myth that there is not enough background checks. Huge. The main reason this happened is people thought we took them away because now we need universal ones. That's a whole different story because that goes into the private sector. But background checks as a whole, some people say we don't have them, like at all. That's so far from the truth. Background checks nowadays, just because they happen instantaneously, that's why people think they don't happen. It's the movement of technology, or the improvement of technology. So now someone working in a gun store, they have their special licensing so they can get direct access to the FBI database. And I walk in and whatever state, I show my qualifications, I say I want to buy that firearm. They go, okay, let me just do a new background check. Boop, 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 check, all right, you're good, now you can buy it. It's not that the background check didn't happen, it happened instantly because that's our technological ability. So with that technology, it's not that they went away, it's that they got better. They got cleaner, they got more consistent, so now they're pretty much accurate 100% of the time. And they happen instantly, so you don't have to wait 4 days for the FBI to get it and then send it out to that gun buyer, and then he has to call you and tell you to come in to get the gun. He can check it, and now it's done instantly, and now you're good. You can buy that firearm. You've gotten your background check. They make sure you have your full qualifications to get that firearm. So just that myth that background checks don't happen, it's a little less common. A lot of people argue the political side of it, universal background checks and stuff like that. But there's a group of people who think background checks don't happen at all because of that discussion. they hear universal background checks and they're like, wait, they don't happen everywhere, so they must not happen that much. But universal background checks, this applies to the private sector. So universal background checks, I did say that. But background checks as a whole in the public sector, gun buyers from gun sellers, they happen 100% of the time. So I think that's just a few of the big myths that we hear. So scary looking guns doesn't mean scary performing guns. The action does not tell us how dangerous a gun is, kind of similar to that first myth. So that bolt action we showed before is a lot stronger than a semi-auto of the same caliber. It just is fired slower. Background checks, the last one we went over, they happen. Just because people say universal background checks just applies to the private sector. So there are background checks in the public sector. And then, what was the other one? Oh, legal gun owners and gun statistics. So handguns cause a lot more harm than AR-15s or any long guns put together. You also have a much higher chance of being stabbed than killed with a long gun. That's one I forgot to put out there. 19 times more likely with a handgun than a long gun of that sort. The myth that long guns are the choice of mass shooters, also not true. Then also the myth that legal gun owners cause a substantial problem, also not true. And that one's kind of simple. Criminals will be criminals. They'll get things illegally, use them illegally.
Yeah.
And then legal gun owners also use them in defensive situations and stop a lot of incidents from happening in the first place, whether they just charge that firearm or not.
Yep.
So I think that's just a good rundown of some bigger myths out there to end our little crash course. So we went over the look of guns, the actions of guns, some that we do have, some that we don't. Then we looked over ammo. I think it's important, even if you don't own a firearm, if you don't know much about firearms, to just learn some of that really basic stuff. Even if you just take a few things from here, or you take this end part and just learn what is and isn't true about firearms, I think it's very important to learn, whether you're going to utilize them or not. So obviously, you can go back, watch this video anytime. If you need to relearn something, ask me questions down below. Ask me questions on my Instagram, which will be linked down below. Subscribe if you want hunting, fishing, gun content. Podcasts, we do a bunch of other different stuff. We'll do music, lifestyle stuff. We're going to do a self-defense podcast, which is going to be funny because I'm going to choke Max a bunch. But then also subscribe for that. Like this video if you like it. Share it with friends. Very important to give good information out to people so they can learn about this stuff. And if you come back next time, we'll see you again. Go check out another video. Until then, I'm Nate.
I'm Max.
And we'll see you next time. Peace.
Adios.